Okay. So again, we're going to talk today about moving from victim consciousness to unity consciousness. And Rena's going to start us off with a little meditation, a little heart opening meditation.
And I want to say that, excuse me, that whatever we discuss here are our opinions based on what we have learned or experienced or gone through. And it's not the ultimate truth about everything. There's lots of different opinions about it, and it's just a conversation. So take what works for you, leave the rest, and we'll have some time where we're going to actually like have comments and questions and kind of go from there. Okay, but for the meditation, just find a comfortable position for yourself. You can close your eyes. You can kind of keep them gazing forward wherever is comfortable for you. And let's just start by taking a few deep breaths. And as you exhale, really feel your body getting a little heavier. Feel yourself getting grounded. Whatever happened earlier in the day, just letting that go. Beautiful. And then we're going to start kind of from the outside of our body. So let's just bring our attention to the skin of our body. So you can feel the air moving on the skin, maybe the clothes. Just noticing those sensations. And then going a little bit more inward, feeling the heartbeat, feeling the blood rushing through the body, whatever physical sensations of body. Maybe there's an aching here or there. Kind of feeling the inside of the body. And just noticing what's there, allowing it to be present. We don't try to change it. And then going a little deeper and seeing if there's any emotions present in the body and where you feel them. Maybe you feel it in your heart space, maybe it's in your throat, maybe it's your lower back or your feet, wherever it is. And you don't necessarily need to name it or say it's because of this, or because of that, just noticing it. There isn't any way you should be feeling, should be experiencing. Just knowing whatever you feel is right for you. And then see if you can go underneath those emotions and feelings. If you bring your attention to your heart space, just in that larger area of your heart, sometimes I can feel some tension there. But if you go beneath that tension, almost to this spot that's between your heart and your back. So if you enter it from the back space, let's say right between your shoulder blades, just a few inches inwards from your spine, see if you can feel this space of peacefulness underneath all of this. Doesn't matter how small or big it is, and usually it's always there. And see what it feels like. It had a color or a shape or a form or a feeling to it. For me, it feels really open and spacious. So this is the space that's always within us, and then all of us have access to this. We all experience it in some similar form or other. And we can take this space, and you can just stay here and just kind of feeling into that space, piece of quietness. Or see if you can start expanding it throughout the body and radiating it into the different parts of the body. If that feels a little too much, just staying in that space where you feel that peacefulness, this oneness feeling. And we're going to just stay here for about another minute or so. Any emotions come up, just allow them to come and go. See if you can remain being a witness within it and keeping yourself in that space of oneness and peacefulness. As a practice, you can also use this oneness to send it to somewhere specific. So if you're feeling a specific emotion in your heart or in anywhere in your space, instead of doing the whole body, or you can just do this certain emotion or body part. So I'm feeling some tension within my heart. So I can just go into that space behind my heart that it's really open and feels good. And then it can radiate the space into the tightness area that I don't need to know what they represent or what they're about. I just shine a light in there. And then slowly allowing your attention to go outwards again, feeling your whole body being present. And as you feel ready, you can start wiggling your fingers and your toes. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or keep them closed for as long as you'd like to.
Thanks, Rena.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I was, you know, thinking about how to talk about victim consciousness, and in light of all of the news in the last few days, which has been pretty intense, related to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and all the pain and suffering that people are feeling. And what it felt, what I had, and I started crying, and I was like, really feeling it in my heart. And what it came to for me was that, I so wanted to, stay in that place of anger for the father, brother, son that George was, and that his life was just taken too soon, right? It was unfair, unjust, it was wrong. And softening in my heart as I was reflecting on that and reading the news, caused a lot of pain to well up in my heart. And I just started crying about it and feeling that pain and suffering that everyone who's close in the circumstance there must be feeling. And how can we not feel like we're a victim in that situation? And what I just had to come to was what Rena was sort of guiding us to, which is staying really conscious in our heart, allowing the heart to stay soft, and allowing ourselves to feel the suffering and the pain that exists in ourselves and in others without the need to cast any blame or shame or fault or wrong on anything. And how I do that is, and I'm a long time student of A Course in Miracles, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with, but the idea of that is, there are only two emotions, truly. There's love, and then there's lack of love. And if you're expressing love and celebration of life and joy and connection, that's here. And if you're experiencing anger, frustration, hate, fear, that's really an expression of a lack of love. And every single expression of lack of love is really requesting love. Like, anytime that we see somebody in pain, which manifests as hatred, fear, anger, frustration, the only response truly is love, is to support and embrace that person who is in pain, just like we would embrace a small child crying about, their friend who belittled them or something, right? Like you comfort the child, and the child who belittled the other child is also feeling pain, and the only reason they lashed out was because they were also hurting inside, right? So how to stay soft in our hearts in a situation like that is, I think, one major component of moving into unity consciousness. It's not the only component, but I think that's a really key one. Any thoughts on that?
And I want to say on that, sorry, go ahead, Brenda.
I guess the first question that comes to mind is being outraged by the injustice doesn't feel like victimhood. To me, it feels like justified anger at injustice. And I think that's a challenging concept to work with. Activism to create justice, doesn't that come from a place of frustration and anger at the way things are and need to be changed? Or how do I get from there, how do I and how does the world get from their justified anger to love as a force for change, I guess.
Yeah. And I don't, if I had the answers, I would be wanting to step forward and shouting it from the rooftops. Like, I have to fall back to and not that this was a very pristine black and white example, but the example of Gandhi in India, right? It's activism with love, patience, and openness. And I think that there are plenty of people who are on the streets protesting for that very reason. And I don't think protesting is a bad thing at all. I think the idea that there is a wrong side and a right side is where we get into the dangerous territory of us versus them, right? Whereas if we can stay in the consciousness that the officer Derek Chauvin, or however you say his name, who put his knee on George's neck and suffocated him to death, is also my brother, right? He's also somebody who's coming from a place of who knows what kind of prejudicial background, whatever pain or abuse or whatever he was raised with, and the fear that he has when working the streets as a cop. I mean, I have no idea, but he's also my brother, right? And so how can we approach the situation with the goal of healing both sides, on healing everyone that's part of the circumstance, then, you know, calling for him to be on death row, or I don't know what you know, people are doing, but the violence, the hatred, is taking us, I think, into that us or them, whereas wanting change and wanting to institute, you know, a measure, you know, changes to the judicial system that allows for a more egalitarian approach that's blind to race. I mean, these are all things that most people want. And I think standing up for that's the right thing to do. Rena, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it actually goes with what I was going to say before a little bit too. So there's a few things. One of my teachers tells this story that you have let's say you have a cloth. It's a silk cloth. That means each thread of the cloth is made out of silk. And if you want to make this silk cloth into a wool cloth, you have to change each thread of this cloth from silk to wool. So if you want to change the society from one thing to another, you have to change each person. And he also has a saying that says, there's not going to be any world peace until there's peace within ourselves. Like, we can't tell people to be peaceful. You can't tell people to be not racist. Like, you know, you can, obviously, but it all comes from finding this peace and this unity consciousness within yourself and realizing we are all part of one. And in my opinion and my experience, that's the only way it's going to come. And, you know, I'm not saying we shouldn't go to the streets and protest and we shouldn't do all these things. And maybe that's what you feel called to. I don't necessarily feel called to doing that. I feel called to having these conversations and spreading this feeling of peacefulness to the world. And that's my path. And somebody else can have a different path. And we all have a reason and point to it. But finding this peace within ourselves, and like you said, Crystal, like, that's my feeling too when I look at this whole thing. I'm like, we're not seeing the whole story. And one isn't more right than the other. And there's so much frustration and anger, which is so old, and centuries and centuries. And it's not even just, I was telling Crystal before that, like, I grew up in Estonia in Northern Europe. You know, we were occupied by Russia for many years, and we've been owned by all these different people, and, you know, slavery, and it, like, my family was taken to Siberia and this whole thing. So it's a very generational feeling, and the way to go about it, of course, is what we're doing in the streets, but it's like, it's love. The answer is love, in my opinion, but it's love for everybody in the situation. I can see it so clearly for both sides, and it's not easy for anybody.
Thanks, Rena.
I have a historical point, Carl. I think you'll probably appreciate this. Do you remember during the Vietnam War in the 60s, protesting by candlelight vigil, you know, give peace a chance? You know, that was the mindset of certain people during that time. You know, where did that go? Is it still here? I mean, we need events to get to a certain level of outrageousness before people display and teach and embrace the love alternative. You know,
Brenda, absolutely. I was thinking that in my birthday's in September. In 1968, I turned 13. This September, I'm turning 65. That's exactly 5 times 13, right?
Wow.
I was thinking, besides the feelings that you all have expressed of outrage and anger and trying to understand what's going on, I felt a little bit of a victim when this started unraveling. Like, why do I have to live all the bad parts of 1968 all over again? My friend was castigating, I don't want to make this political, but it does fit, Joe Biden for not coming down strongly enough. And I said, you know, he's Hubert Humphrey from 1968. And sitting there, a guy who was a conciliator, who really seemed to love people and wanted to bring them together. And here he was, the same kinds of things were happening. There were all these riots in 68. And he was sitting there trying to, Humphrey, figure out, how do I send a message that we can't tolerate this kind of violence on either side or oppression without blaming people. And it's true. I was also thinking when I was in college, my friend's dad had died in high school and his mother remarried, and her second husband had been a street policeman and then a detective in New York City. And my parents had a party and they were there, and he was a quiet, soft-spoken guy who mostly let conversation go around him. And he only chimed in when somebody brought up this kind of issue and was really jumping on the police. And he said, I've been in these situations. I've been out in a playground in a poor part of Queens, maybe me and my partner, maybe two other cops, with trying to break up something or apprehend a criminal, and suddenly the whole neighborhood is surrounding. And they're not really on your side. And what do you do? At that point, do you try to like take responsibility for the whole history of mistreatment of minorities? They don't want to hear that either. They want something, and you've got a gun. You don't want to use it, but you know that it may turn out to be your only out. Thank God he never had to do anything more maybe than threaten somebody to get out of a situation like that intact. But it always stuck with me. I mean, with people, we don't know everybody's backstory, and everybody's feeling hurt and pain and fear. And
yeah,
the only answer is to get everybody to say we're all in this mess together. And we're the same thing with wearing masks and not wearing masks and stuff. Like, the people who don't want to wear them, I think a lot of them do have a deep-seated fear that their rights are being eroded.
oh yeah, yeah,
And
for sure.
we all, and we're all reacting to some fear, and maybe one type of fear is affecting me more than it's affecting this other person.
And so this is kind of the point, right? Like, all of these things are all part of that victim consciousness, right?
Right.
So, I mean, the corollary between Vietnam and now is that there is abuse of power happening, and people are upset that there are abuses of power by people in positions of control. And so they're reacting, but what they're reacting from or to is a feeling of powerlessness.
Right.
Right? If they didn't feel powerless, they wouldn't, and I'm not talking about, I think peaceful protesting is a wonderful way to demonstrate your power, right? But people who are demonstrating their powerlessness are those who are, becoming the abuser, right? The abused becomes the abuser, the victim becomes the victimizer. And I experienced this endlessly when I lived in Jerusalem and worked for 3 years with the Palestinian refugees. And I just saw so clearly, I mean, it was just so obvious that, the victims during the Holocaust had created a society that was now becoming the victimizer of the Palestinians. And, it breaks your heart to see. And it happens because we continue to be rooted in the victim consciousness. So how do we move from victim consciousness to unity consciousness? Like, how do we do it? I think we have to start within, right? We have to start with our own hearts and with our own self. And we can't, the moment we expect someone else to do it, the moment we judge somebody for not doing it, we put ourselves right back, pull ourselves right back out of unity consciousness and back into victim consciousness, right? So a big part of this is, you know, the heart-centeredness and the vulnerability to feel other people's pain and April, you might need to mute there. There's some voices coming through. April, you might need to mute if there's lots of voices coming through. Is to keep our hearts open and vulnerable, which means that we will feel the suffering of ourselves and other people in our hearts. But as long as we stay soft to that, then we can not identify with, you know, the blame or shame aspect of victim consciousness. And then I think the other side is, you know, really learning to take responsibility for ourselves. You know, it's sort of the idea that I'm a co-creator of my reality, and that everything that I find myself experiencing, I have chosen on some level, even if it is externally appears as something that's really painful and ugly. I have co-created this on some level, because if we are all one consciousness in truth, and all aspects of that one consciousness, then anything that happens in that one is part of me as well. And so, you know, there's a few elements here. I think taking responsibility for ourselves, for our beliefs, our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior, right? They go in that direction. So we have our beliefs, and some beliefs we don't even recognize that we have. They're so deep-seated, and they're so ingrained in the collective consciousness that we don't even realize we have them. But our beliefs, you know, inform our thoughts about the world around us. That's just the natural flow of that. So and then our thoughts naturally inform our emotions, right? So if I believe that if I believe in sin, right? If I believe in the 10 Commandments, for example, then my thought about you know, a non-monogamous relationship is going to be a certain way. And then my emotions about somebody acting in a non-monogamous fashion is going to be judgment, anger, whatever. And so those emotions then govern my behavior. So then my behavior towards that person will project what my emotion is about that non-monogamous behavior, right? So so to take responsibility for all of those things, for our, you know, first our behavior, which reflects our thoughts, which reflects our emotions, which reflects our thoughts and beliefs, is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And it's not something that I'm good at. I recognize that it's there, and I try to practice this. I guess we lost April. And I think one of the things that the ego does in response to this idea is it likes to, you know, be like, oh, well, if I find myself in a bad job or an abusive relationship, then it's all my fault, you know, and then I'm a terrible person, and I'm not worthy of love, and I'm, you know, I'm just bad. But that's, you know, that's the ego's trap, right? So when we take this responsibility for co-creating our reality, we also have to recognize what the ego's tendencies are in that, which is to grasp us back into this idea of blame and shame and an unworthiness, rather than staying centered in our heart. And that's why the heart aspect is so important, that we can stay open to our innocence, right? Like, we are all innocent. We are all like a child in our innocence, and that has never ever left us, but we just forget about it all the time. all the time. And so then when we're really taking responsibility for our world, for what we create, then we can actually feel very empowered to begin creating what we want to create, versus being, you know, just a victim to external circumstance. I mean, I've had some difficult situations in my life that I recognize that I created very intentionally so that I could grow and learn and expand in this lifetime in a particular way. And I think we all have that. You know, when I was a young college student and I was so angry, like so filled with anger and hatred towards my stepfather, who I felt was incredibly abusive and unloving and unkind and, you know, all the bad things that I could think of. And he was the biggest judger in the world. He judged everybody and he hated everybody. And oh my gosh, you know, what a revelation to realize that he's just my biggest savior. Like if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have gone into the depths of the exploration of my soul that I did as a result of that pain that I felt, right? And just, you know, he was like the pressure that caused the coal to compress to form a beautiful jewel, a diamond or something, right? So sometimes we need that pressure. And so maybe the pressure of the coronavirus and the pressure of, you know, George Floyd's death is that pressure to help us crystallize and empower us to be more heart-centered and more loving and more kind and more compassionate people. So I open the floor. Sorry, I went on for a really long time, sorry.
I want to say two things about it. God, I hate this concept, and I know it's true. You know I created these situations, and I'm like, why do I keep doing this? That's me being in a frustrated state when things are happening, and it's just like, oh. And the other thing of it is, and it's okay to sometimes be in that space and just be like, what the hell? Or whatever it is that you want to express. But then coming to realize that if you look at yourself a year ago, or 10 years ago, or when you were 13, 1968, and if you look at the world as a whole in the same way, like we are progressing and we are changing and we are evolving. I mean, if you look at what year is it, 2020, 1920, you know, the way, like, we as a society and like human race, almost like, you know, how much we've evolved, not just like, you know, electronically or whatever, like how our minds have expanded, how we are not burning witches at whatever nest anymore. Just the openness. And then if you look at the kids that are born nowadays, you know, they're so aware and conscious, and they're going to come to this world where, you know, yoga and meditation is already part of their lives, and how amazing they're going to be 20 years from now and what our world is going to look like. So we are evolving as a society and we are getting better. And, you know, it is like a retake of Vietnam War probably, and hopefully, but it like we also almost like need a crisis. Like all of us need a crisis in our life. Like this is how I came to, you know, meditation was like, I got divorced and I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? You know, and we all have our own crisis, and COVID is a crisis for a lot of people, and some people need the thing with that. Like we all go through different things, and not everybody's going to realize it right now. And it's maybe 10 years from now, we don't know, because we're all on our own path, because we're all co-creating it based on what we need and what we came to experience. And some of us, we're never going to realize any of it, and they are just here to ignite and to make other people. They're like the teachers, really, like, you know, our stepfathers, our ex-husbands, and all of those. They came here to make life hard for us in a way, but really they're our teachers.
Biggest ones, yeah.
Yeah, and lots of traditions, well, and maybe not lots of, like, I know traditions where they're like, you know, they actually could be more evolved souls, but they decided to become these people who everybody's going to hate upon because of whatever behavior. Like, we don't know. You know, maybe it's, you know, Jesus reincarnated. Who knows? Nobody knows. Like he, like whatever the police officer was that did this thing, that started this whole thing, like maybe that's what he came here to do. He came here to be this person. and that's his lessons that he came here to learn, or karma to burn because of other things he's done in other lives. Like, we don't know. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The picture's so much more vast than our, it's like we've got blinders on and all we can see is this, right? But there's so much. There's so much more.
Well, and change, we get locked into these patterns of coping in a certain way, and something really jolting or jarring has to take place to make us look at what we're doing and see if we can change it. And we have a lot of ability to tolerate our own pain, I think, because well, they say the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, or is easier to stick to. And sometimes it takes, we've been bumping along on civil rights in a certain way for a long time. And even though we know things are, as a whole, we know things are bad, we didn't know until that it was this bad, and there was this much simmering that until it boiled over. And now the only way forward is to totally rethink it.
And you know
Because,
what I love about it though, Carl, is that it's like the spotlight is being shown on
right,
the racial injustice,
right,
and we needed it to be at the surface for it to heal, right? We can never heal
right,
something that's hidden. So
right.
yeah, it is at the
And
surface now.
I think this is what we talked about when our first Chrysalis, about how astrologically we are in the same place we were in 1968, and we are the same, like, the stars are aligned again for us to go through this purification, this clearance. But it's like the way it's happening now because of the internet, it's so much more expanded and so much more in your face, and like things can happen really fast. The Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all of it. It's just, and it keeps happening and happening throughout time for us to heal all the past wounds and to become one.
Yeah.
Even a theory of the heart that many people walk around with a closed heart, right? But when the heart opens, anything that's being held in it, negative or positive, comes out and is making space for new things to come in. I also apologize for all the previous noise I caused back here. But part of that healing is to allow the things that are in there to get out, increase awareness of what was held in there. And it's very shocking for a lot of people. Maybe they didn't know what their true feelings were, but it's becoming a global vision now. We can see how people have different thoughts, especially in regards to race. And, we're going to have to go through this in order to heal it. I also like Rita's explanation of the clock. I remember a story hearing about a rug, how it's very similar. Each thread has its own row, and its only function is to be a row, not realizing that it's actually a rug.
Right.
So people are the same way. They see themselves maybe as this thread that's going in one direction, but if they can open up their mind and see the greater picture and see this beautiful tapestry that it's a part of, and that's just like us. There's something so much bigger that we need to awaken to.
Yeah, thanks, April. Yeah, it's like we're all cells in a great organism, and we can't see, what the whole organism is doing. We can only see our little part and our relationship with all the little cells around us, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I love the analogy of like they don't even know what's in their heart. That's a really good point. Like, it's scary for ourselves to see what's really there.
Yeah.
I recognize that this is supposed to be 45 minutes and we've just hit 45 minutes, but I want to honor any other thoughts or ideas that anyone else wants to share before we conclude.
I think with what's going on right now, especially with Floyd, is it also shows this accumulation of pain. So it's not just one incident, it is triggering layers and layers decades and decades of pain, and that's what we're seeing. And so the responses are very harsh and sharp because of past hurts, right? And that's what's being stimulated. And I think, you know, a lot of folks don't realize that, but that's what's coming in. You can't help it, right? Old pain, because it was never healed, is just exploding now.
Yeah, that's what happens when it's so deep and it's been held for so long. It has to kind of explode. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Do you know there was a play called and then became a movie, A Raisin in the Sun, by Langston Hughes. I don't know how much he had to do with the play and the movie, but he did a poem, and it was about what happens to a dream deferred. And it goes through, does it get better? Does it disappear? And the last line is, or like a raisin in the sun, does it explode? It's about it, and it's an apt analogy. I think it's about a Black family trying to struggle in an urban environment, and I guess the son is angry, and he winds up getting arrested for something. I can't remember how it works out, but yeah, that's sort of like it gets to a saturation point, and then. But the one other thing I want to say is that, you know, I've been also thinking about why did I get to live through both of these similar situations, and I feel my role is to try to be more of is to help other people through it. And like a lot of my neighbors who are younger say to me, have you ever seen anything like this? And I'm like, well, yes. There are elements here we didn't have, but we got through it, and we will. And, you know, this is what I can tell you about what happened then and what might happen now, but we will get through it. So, yeah, it is a test, and we try to bring the best parts to it, and that also helps me get out of the feeling of being a victim. Is like somebody's more worried about this than I am, and I've lived, you know, a good part of my life. A lot of them are like, I'm still getting started. So how am I going to help them get enough comfort and courage to go forward in this kind of situation? So.
That's lovely, Carl. Thank you. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I think we'll conclude. We don't have more of these on the schedule, but we can put more out there in about 2.5 weeks. We're also going to use the Chrysalis platform to, Mary Maruka and I are going to start a 5-session series on how to use some of these principles of like holism and neutrality that we find in our therapeutic practice, and how we can use those to improve our own well-being and health as individuals. So we're going to be starting that on Tuesday evenings, so you can look out for that. But I think Rena and I can also keep this going. We can have 2 kind of concurrent Chrysalis platforms going. All right. Well, thanks guys for joining. Very nice to meet you, April.
Thank you. Again, sorry for the noise and the disruption.
No worries.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet
All right.
you.
All right, bye,
Namaste,
everyone.
Thank
everybody.
you, Rena.
Namaste.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye, Carl.
Bye.